This video deals with the book Ancient Law by Sir Henry Maine. Consider this as a summarized audio version of the book. Each video will contain a single chapter. This is an old book from 1861, but I think it is still worth reading today. I want these videos to be easily memorized, so I have divided them into parts. The first chapter contains these three parts. The introduction is the reason of the author for writing this book. The second part is all the different forms in which law existed before it was finally written down. And the third part are some details which I didn't mention in the second part. Part 1 is the introduction, the reason of the author for writing the book. The author is trying to answer the question, where does law come from? He says that the theories which try to answer this question are merely guesses, not based on historical research, and so they should be rejected. One might ask the question, why does it matter what people believe happened in the past? It matters because people's actions are based on their beliefs, and even wrong theories about the law can greatly influence legal development if they are believed. In short, the author is trying to show us the proper way of developing a theory, sober historical research. Let us look at one such theory. It is the social contract theory. It has many versions, but the main belief is that people gathered and made a contract with each other to live in accordance with certain rules. We know that this never happened and that the social contract theory is historically untrue, and so it should be rejected. Part 2 is the different forms in which law has existed. The author identifies two forms in which the law existed before it was eventually written down. The first form existed in the heroic age of kings. The second form existed when the king lost his powers to the aristocracy, and the third form is the written code. So what is the heroic age? An age with an all-powerful king who has a sacred divine claim to the throne, but he is not the lawmaker. To understand what law was like in the heroic age, we must first look at another concept, the concept of divine agency. To the people of primitive societies, the only explanation for repeated natural phenomena was to suppose a divine person. So for them, the sun was divine and he was also a person. The fire was also divine and a person. The wind was also divine and a person. To explain this, I've taken a quotation from another book called Roots of Romanticism by Isaiah Berlin. So look at this quotation. It says, everything is full of Jove. So Jove is a bearded god, but everything is made of him as well. So this is the old concept, the concept of divine agency. This was not restricted to the physical world. When a king was called to decide a case, his judgment was also a divine person. It was thought to be inspired directly in the heart. The judgment was called Themis, and it was impersonated in the goddess Themis, the goddess of justice. So this is the first form in which we find the law. We must remember that these Themises, these judgments were not connected with each other by any principle. Usually when a judge decides a case, it is thought that his judgments and the judgments which came before him and after him are usually connected by some principle, some general principle, some main principle which is the same and is being applied to different facts. But in the concept of Themis, we see that these judgments are disconnected from each other. It is usually supposed that the kings in primitive societies, or whoever is deciding a case, would be upholding the customs and usages of the society. This is not true. The concept of Themis comes before any customs are developed. In primitive societies, cases are likely to be similar and thus similar decisions are reached. This is how customs start to develop. So, the customs come after the judgment and not before them. The second is the stage of aristocracies. The king starts to lose his influence until he becomes a mere shell and the real power falls to the aristocrats. The aristocrats do claim a sacred character, but their power does not depend on this claim. In Italy, Greece, and Asia Minor, the aristocrats are held together by an assumed blood relation with each other. When we go further into Asia, for example, the Persian monarchs and the Indian peninsula, we see that two types of aristocrats exist, the military and the religious. In the East, the religious aristocrats would win out most of the times, and the king would retain most of his powers, but he would be restricted by these aristocrats, these priestly classes. So, in what form does law exist here? The aristocrats claim the knowledge of law. They are the administrators of law. They say that we are the only ones with the true knowledge of law. So people might think this is some mechanism to cause tyranny, to claim monopoly over the law, but this was done usually to preserve the customs. Because if you tell everybody the custom, it will spread out and then it will mutate into different forms. It will be corrupted and changed. So the aristocrats kept the knowledge to themselves and they administrated the law. This is the form in which law existed. This is the age of customary law. The author calls this the only unwritten law. He says that there is no unwritten law except this. He says that in England today, no law can be truly called unwritten. He's talking in 1861. So he says that there is no unwritten law in England today, 1861. Here we come to the stage of written law. To understand written codes, we need to look at their characteristics. The first thing to note is that they were not obtained to help the public. It was simply more convenient to write things down when writing was discovered. The second thing to note is that they were not properly structured. The Roman code has some structure, but usually the ancient codes were not structured. The third point is that there were two types of codes. One recording the actual customs which were observed in society, and the other was simply recording an ideal version of what they thought should be observed in society. The second type was obtained usually where there was a religious aristocracy. So, and they recorded laws as if they were divinely inspired in perfect form. Now we should remember that these ancient codes were really important to their societies. Every society eventually got a written code. But the time period in which it got it mattered. If they got it sooner, it would benefit them by protecting their customs. Why? Because when customs are not written, they have a chance of being corrupted. So when they're written down, that chance goes down. So if a society obtained a written code earlier, its customs were protected, and if it obtained them later, the customs were corrupted. The author thinks this is the reason why there is a caste system. He says that maybe at some time in history it had a valid excuse for existence, but today it does not. So part 3, we have some minor concepts. The first is the concept of using literature as a source of history. For example, the concept of themesis was taken from the literature of Homer. Because Homer was part of that society, he believed what the society believed, and we can take those beliefs from his stories. There is no reason to believe he would have corrupted them because they were not part of a conscious thought at that time. The second is the concept of progress. We see that the author believes that the societies are slowly moving forward. They're slowly progressing in civilization, he says, in material civilization when they get items, when they make things, in ideological civilization when they mature their ideas. This is not a universal belief and not everybody believes it. And the third is the criticism of John Austen's command theory. John Austen said that every law can be thought of as a command of sovereign backed by sanction. So this today is not very much believed, but at the time of the author, this was the main jurisprudential theory. So the author says that when we go back in time and look at primitive societies, we don't find a lawgiver, we don't find a lawmaker. So this theory is not true. And today this theory is not believed anyways.